Okay, so today I'm going to go through the digging for data homework just because, not because I think a lot of people are really struggling with it, but just because I think that there are a lot of pieces to this particular homework set and there are a lot of pages. So if you were not as focused or you were confused during class, you might be a little behind and might be a little overwhelmed by the number of pages in this homework. So check yourself if you did not finish at least 3 pages in class. What were you doing in the 15 to 20 minutes we had to work on this in class? And that's a question, that's a personal question that you should answer for yourself. So the first page that we have in Digging for Data has a graph that looks like this. And in class today, we talked about how this is a bar graph. And there are a couple features of bar graphs that we have. On the bottom, these numbers down here are part of the x-axis. This right here is the y-axis, and both of these give information about the bars that go across. So we have here a class, as it says in our M-Cubed books, that interviewed students based on the number of pets that they have. So we see dogs have in between 4 and 6 pets, which we know would be 5. Cats goes up to the end 4, so 4 people have cats. Goldfish, 2 people have goldfish, and the number of people with no pets is in between 4 and 6 again, so we know that that is also 5. So these are the bars, these are the axis and labels. This is my graph title, which is number of pets for this classroom, and this is my key, which tells me that these bars represent the number of pets. So that's kind of going through all the steps of a bar diagram that shows this kind of data. What this page is asking you to do in your M-Cubed book is come up with 3 questions that you could ask about this graph. So instead of being the student where you just ask questions, where you answer questions about data, it is now your turn to pretend to be Miss B and think what questions would you ask a class if you were given this graph. So I'm going to give you a couple examples, but there are hundreds of questions we could ask about this graph. So one question we could ask is, how many people in this class own dogs? And we can answer this question, 5 people own dogs. That's something that I'd have to read the graph to figure out. I could ask how many people in this class own goldfish, cats, and dogs. I'd have to add together 5 plus 4 plus 2. I could ask how many people in this class were interviewed total, which I'd have to add together all of these pieces of data. What is the least popular kind of pet? Those are all questions that I could figure out by looking at this graph. Page 35 on Digging for Data shows another class that interviewed, and this time, so we again have our x-axis, which has 3 categories, blue, green, and brown eyes on the bottom. We have our y-axis, which has a bunch of numbers. So these are the number of people that have each of these different eye colors down here. Now, this one looks a little funky. Again, it's a bar diagram, but it's going the other way from the previous graph. So this one is going horizontally. This one is going more vertically. And we see there are 2 bar things coming up off of each of these bottom categories. You might be thinking, what is that? That is why we need our key over here. Over here we only had 1, so it wasn't as important. Here we have 2 different groupings that are being looked at. So for boys, it's this lighter blue color. This. So if we wanted to see how many boys had blue eyes, I would go to this matching color over here, and I'd see, oh, there are 4 boys with blue eyes. And for girls, it's this darker blue color. So I would go over to blue for this darker if I want to know how many girls have blue eyes. And I'd see it goes up to 2. And so I know that 2 girls have blue eyes. So 4 boys, 2 girls, 6 total. And I got the total by adding together the girls and the boys. So that's just a little bit about how to read this bar diagram. Make sure that you are looking at the correct key when you're answering these questions. So the first thing that it asks you is to come up with your own questions about this graph. So again, you're pretending to be Miss V and you're thinking of questions that you can ask and answer by looking at this graph. Again, you could ask, what is the most common eye color? How many students were interviewed in the class? How many girls are in the class? All of these are valid questions. I want you to come up with your own for these ones because I gave so many examples on the last page. Then it goes on to page 36, which is more questions about that same graph. So I'm going to keep coming back to this page because that's where, that's a graph that we're talking about. So some questions cannot be answered by studying this graph, such as, does Gino, who is a student in this class, have brown eyes? the question is, why can't you answer this question for sure? And what might you predict Gino's eye color to be? So over here in our key, we only have two categories given, boys and girls. Nowhere on this graph is there a Gino. There could be a Gino in this class, but we don't know where he falls in this data. He falls in the boys category, but there are boys who have blue eyes, there are boys who have green eyes, and boys who have brown eyes. So we don't know where Gino falls in these categories. Now, if we look at this, we can predict what color eyes he has. He is I apologize, there's a minor technical difficulty. Okay, so we know for sure, we can't know for sure where Gino falls, but we can guess. There are more boys who have brown eyes than any other color. That's the most common for both boys and girls. So we can predict that he has brown eyes, but we don't know for sure. He could have, it is possible, as if you remember from talking about probability, it is possible that he has blue eyes, it's possible that he has green eyes, it's possible that he has brown eyes, but more options, more boys have brown eyes, so that's most likely. The next question, write down 3 more questions about eye color that cannot be answered by studying this graph. Try to come up with different types of questions. Okay, so questions that cannot be answered by this graph are as crazy as, what is this class's preference on ice cream? So we cannot tell what this class's preference is on ice cream because that's not what this graph is asking about. It's asking about eye color. It could be as crazy as how many push-ups could, students in the U.S., anything that's not addressed by this particular graph. This particular graph only deals with eye color in this classroom, so any other questions that you could ask this class not dealing with eye color are not able to be answered by this. Other more specific to this graph kind of questions are, is brown eye color the most common eye color for the whole school, for example? That's a question about eye color that really can't be answered by this graph because it only focuses on this class. What color are the teacher's eyes cannot be answered by this question. You could pick another random student from this class. You could say Gina is a student in this class. Can you be sure what color eyes she has? What is the most likely color eyes that she has? So those are all questions that can't be answered because our graph only gives us general information about boys and girls in this one classroom. So think deeply, page 37. Write a question that can be answered using the eye color graph and explain how to find the answer to your question. Give the answer. So again, just like you did for this one, just like you did when you wrote down your original questions for this one, you're coming up with a NSBE question for this graph. I'm going to go through how many students were surveyed in this class, because I think that's an important one for us to know how to do. So in this graph, I see that, again, blue represents boys, darker blue represents girls. I see that there are 4 boys who have blue eyes. So I'm going to go 4 plus, there are 2 girls with blue eyes, so 4 plus 2. There are 2 boys with green eyes, so that's plus 2. There are 5 girls with green eyes, so that's plus 5. There are 6 boys with brown eyes, so that's plus 6. And there are 8 girls with this eye color. So if I add them all together, let's see here. I end up with 27. So there are 27 students interviewed in this whole class about their eye color because I added together the numbers from each column. So you can use that for your Think Deeply, or you can come up with your own question and answer it and explain using the NSBE method how you came up with that answer. Next one is page 41 on digging for data. And this is what we practiced a lot in class. I'm giving you a blank slate of a graph. And what I want you to do is come up with your own story. What is category A? What is category B? Give it a title. Make sure you label your 2 axes. So what makes sense? So I'm going to give you an example here. Number of books read in 2nd grade versus number of books read chapter books read in 3rd grade. In 2nd grade, it would make sense that you only read 4 chapter books, and in 3rd grade, it would make sense that you read 15 chapter books. That's an example. So it makes sense because one is less than the other, and I have to explain that difference. And this number of books on this side is reasonable. For example, I couldn't do like number of breaths that you took today at school versus the number of breaths you took when you were running at school. I couldn't do that because these numbers wouldn't work for that. They're too small. I would need hundreds instead of these counting by 4s or counting by 2s. Think deeply, page 45. And again, this is a question that we've talked a lot about in class. If there are no labels on a graph, how can you decide what information is being displayed? What clues do you look for? And I think this is a really important question that you should focus and really answer deeply. A lot of students forget to add a title, they forget to add labels, they forget to do all these things. So make sure that you take the time to put the labels on your graph. There's so much information lost in that graph story if we don't have those labels there. So when we're given a blank graph like this, though, what can we tell? There are things that won't work for this graph, like I gave you an example. You could come up with more examples. So what things can we tell from a graph without labels, and why is it important to have labels is what this question is really asking. Thanks so much for watching, and happy solving.